What's going on, everyone? My name is Broussard. Welcome back to my channel. We are back with another video, and today we have more track reviews for you guys, continuing the track review series. Something that I've said before that it's going to be plenty of. I uploaded my next track for distribution. I did end up doing that, so that'll be out. Today is the 15th that I'm recording this. That'll be out on, if everything goes right, March 20th. So it looks like in the meantime, you guys will be getting about 5 or 6 more track reviews until we break down that track. A track that I'm excited for, a track that if you've seen my previous breakdown, probably my last breakdown, I mentioned was really hard to get right. Probably the most hours I've spent on a track since Exposition, but now I'm getting ahead of myself because it's track reviews, not much of an intro here. We're gonna get straight to it because we have an exciting track with an artist that I haven't covered yet, but yeah, exciting track, exciting artist, one of my favorites. So don't forget to like and subscribe, but without further ado, let's hop into Spotify. All right, we are back in Spotify taking a look at The Longest Night by NURKO and Valerie Broussard. Hope I'm saying that right. And wardrobe change, right? Jersey, NURKO jersey. I really like NURKO. This actually might be the first jersey I bought. Quick side note, I'm definitely more of a jersey guy if I ever go to music festivals. I'm the type of guy that just wears my normal stuff. Throw a jersey on there with an artist on the lineup or just any artist I like. So I have a few of these. I don't have too many. I have like 4 jerseys, but NURKO is one of them, and I think it's the first one I bought. And here we go. NURKO jersey up, NURKO jersey on for the review of The Longest Night by NURKO. All right, and for the preface, there's probably a million things that I hope I remember all of them that I want to emphasize today. Let's start with, we'll probably go over this one at the end. But let's start with, I'll start with one of them, which is I just remembered after seeing the singer Valerie Broussard on here. Broussard, we're going to say Broussard. Which is, I believe, I don't know how many tracks NURKO has made with Valerie. Let's check it out. Okay, just one, it looks like, which I'm familiar with Sideways, a track that's on my playlist, actually. So it looks like a second track between their collabs. Quick side note, on Sideways, I know it's an Millennium track on Millennium's album, but it definitely feels more like a NURKO track to me, which is something that sometimes happens when artists collab together, right? Sometimes they both work together, but the style and the characteristics sound more like the other. So I would probably, I call this an Millennium track, but I would definitely consider this a pretty hard collab between NURKO and Valerie Broussard. Which means that we have our second one today. Okay, so that's the first thing, right? Second track between these two artists. Nothing really that's going to influence kind of my opinion on it. I know in the last video I talked about if we're allowed to compare 2 tracks. That won't really apply today, although I'll talk about some of the things that this track reminds me of. But that won't apply today. I just wanted to draw attention to that because, you know, we're drawing similarities between other NURKO's tracks. The other thing I was going to mention is I definitely am a big NURKO fan. One of the earlier artists I discovered. I haven't been listening to him as much recently, and I haven't really listened to much of his new stuff. And that's just kind of the cycle of life of you like an artist, you listen to their things, and then, you know, a few tracks come out and you check them out and, you know, you don't add them to your playlist, and then you kind of, you discover other artists, right? It's just the cycle of listening to music. You discover an artist, you like them, you discover other ones you kind of forget. You know, they drop some tracks that you don't listen to, and then you come back to them, and, you know, at this time I liked it. I've listened to some NURKO tracks recently that come up on my release radar. Some of them I like, some of them that aren't really for me. But actually, before I forget, let's take a look at that right now. Because the other thing I wanted to mention is kind of drawing attention to NURKO and kind of an artist that definitely has a lot of spots on my playlist. By no means does he have the most spots. Millennium might be one of the ones that has the most spot on my playlist, even though I don't own an Millennium jersey. Which brings me to the other thing I was going to say, which is NURKO is definitely probably my favorite artist we've reviewed up to this point. Millennium's up there, but I think NURKO's a little bit more specifically for me. Millennium is a little bit more kind of does a lot of things well, but this NURKO's specific sound I really like. So we'll take a look at these, you know, Clouds, Let Me Go. You can see a lot of these are older tracks. Taking a look at these two specifically, probably some of his newer tracks, 2023 even, that was 3 years ago. So as you can see, I haven't been listening to as much recently. Again, you discover other artists, you know, in this time I'm probably getting really into trance and things like that, and progressive style sounds, because that's 2023. My Expression EP came out 2024. So I was probably switching up what I was listening to around this time. But you can see a lot of his older stuff in here. One thing I did want to, actually, before I forget, Too Long Eternity I really like. Definitely kind of similar to, similar as it gets to what we're listening to now versus his other tracks, which are a little bit more different than what we're listening to now. I wanted to call attention to Let Me Go, which is, I think, the first track, even though it's second here. It's the first, I don't know why it's second. It's the first track of NURKO's I discovered that I listened to that I really like. A track that, for a quick rapid fire, I would probably give like a really nice hard 7 out of 10. This is probably a really good example of what I think a 7 out of 10 looks like. Part of it might be subjective because it's the first track I've listened of his, but also it's an experience that not a lot of artists not a lot of other tracks deliver. And it's one of those tracks that doesn't really do anything too extravagant, but what it does really, really well. And it's a good kind of masterclass in just doing progression and movements and experiences. So I really, really like Let Me Go. Probably a nice solid 7 out of 10 for if you guys want to check this track out. Definitely one of his older tracks. I mean, let's take a look. That's 2017. But one of the first tracks of his I discovered. Okay, I just remembered another thing I wanted to mention, and a lot of them are kind of quick, small things. And before I forget, you'll notice this is a single. It's on the 3-track single. I looked into his discography. It's not labeled as an EP. So, and I've been trying to hold back on rating tracks alone that are parts of larger projects. But this is listed as a single, so I'm gonna rate it today, and I'm gonna listen to it today. But there's a lot of small things I want to call attention to. The biggest thing I want to call attention to, what are we talking about today? What is kind of the emphasis of today? Is going to be, it's very subtle and it's hard to put into words, but what I am going to call attention to is lyrics, and specifically, well, when I say not lyrics, vocals, because as I mentioned before, vocals can, in my eyes, be broken down in 2 parts. Number 1 is the actual lyrics and what the artist is saying. And number 2, which to some extent might be more important in some ways, depends on the track, is what is number 2? Is the rhythm and the melody of the actual vocals, of the lyrics. So kind of what I'm drawing attention today is lyrics, and specifically the second aspect. And what I'm drawing attention to today, the emphasis of today is going to be vocals, specifically the second aspect, which is the melody and the rhythm, and how the melody and the melody, I guess we could just say, but it's things like how the vocals connect and how they sway from one another, which I guess goes hand in hand with the melody. But how the vocals go hand in hand with the track. It's something I've talked about in my progression videos, about kind of how emphasizing different things and drawing attention to different rhythms can give tracks progression. And that's something we're going to talk about, how the vocals and the track work together to give an experience, kind of to work together. The experience is something else. So, yet another thing I need to talk about. I definitely want to talk about the lyrics as well, but that's not an important thing I want to emphasize today. It's just a note I want to make. But we're talking about how the vocals and the track work together to do something nice, right? There you go. There's your sneak peek. To do something nice. I hope I remember everything I need to say once we actually get into the track. But because again, it's a lot of small things. But so why don't we actually get into listening right now? Because we're going to be listening to The Longest Night by NURKO. I am forgetting one thing, which is, I still want to get, the other thing I was going to mention is, just like last video, I still want to understand the track a little bit more and get a clearer picture, so I probably won't be saying as much this video, which is why I definitely want to call attention to the vocals and how the vocals and the rhythm and the melody of the vocals and how they kind of work with the track. So I'll still call attention to the things I need to call attention to. But other than that, I'll be a little bit more immersed this listening session. All right, but that about does it. Why don't we actually get to listening to this track? As a reminder, I won't be playing any audio for copyright reasons, but we can all listen to the track at the same time with The Longest Night by NURKO starting in 3, 2, 1. Let's get the visuals. Really nice intro. I don't know if we've had many tracks with strings. Now that I think about it, Dimension has. So correct me if I'm wrong, but a track with strings, I love it. We don't get that a lot, and so far. The first thing you notice is that the attention is really on the vocals. Something I talked about in the last Heroes breakdown. But again, this is an example of a track, nice kick, where the attention is on the lyrics. The vocals have really good movement to them, right? You get different melodies and different rhythms to them. Not to mention you have the kick that sounds a little bit more acoustic-y. Already we have like a folktronic type feeling. I'm hearing some really nice bass notes that I can't quite describe. Again, good emphasis where the the instruments come down and the emphasis is on the lyrics. But again, let's really listen for the to the vocal melody and how the instruments work together. You pick it up a little bit, you get that kind of what's going to become your hook. Very big NURKO style sound, although pretty unique from at least to his old stuff. Vocals have really nice melodies here. Build up comes in. We're gonna get your drop in a second. To me, this sounds unique for a NURKO style drop. I'm so used to his other more sustained, big, super solid lead style sound. This has a little bit more movement in the melody. Really nice snare. Vocals are there. Double on the kick. You bring it down, the track has movement. By the way, 4 minute and 25-second track, I like it. Kick launches into the second verse. Pay attention to the kind of the storytelling right here. Specifically the instruments. And the vocals rather, but specifically the instruments. Clap comes in. Again, just throwing some variation in rhythm with the drums and the different rhythms of the vocals works so well. Hi-hat. You hear that kind of guitar, almost banjo-like sound. Drop the instruments again. A little bit more symmetrical, but you get a little bit more vocals. Plus the progression was there, so I do like it. Right there, there's that kind of that rise in the vocals. From what I can tell, it's a symmetrical build up here, symmetrical area. Maybe there's an extra VST in there into your build up. Pay close attention to how the drop sounds as well, because I'm going to call attention to that. Kick, nice plucks. Listen to the snare right here. Vocals are there. Double on the kick. Into your outro. Oh, actually, I forgot about that. A really nice extension of that drop that I really like. I do really like that extension. And then we'll go into the outro, which I want you to pay attention to as well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4. So 4 bars. And then another 4 bars, i.e. 8 bars. 8 bar outro. Oh, a nice instrument. Really nice instrument there. And that is The Longest Night by NURKO and Valerie Broussard. All right, a lot to go over here. I hope I don't forget everything I want to go over. Let's start with the one that's right in front of me before I forget. Quick side note, this has nothing to do with this track, but I've been wanting to draw attention to this on a track for a while, and this is the first one I'm going to draw attention to, is the canvas. If you guys haven't noticed, none of my tracks have any canvases. I'm actually not a big fan of canvases because I recognize that they can allow kind of another dimension of expression on top of what is already your artwork, but I feel like the artwork should be, and this is definitely something I do, the artwork is just chosen so intentionally that I want that to be the emphasis. I don't want people to be on the Spotify app playing my track and then something that isn't the artwork comes up. The reason I draw attention to that here is because I find in most tracks it doesn't matter, but you'll notice here that the artwork looks one way and the canvas, the color is different. Ignoring the fact that Spotify kind of dims down the canvas, which is why I even then I don't like just throwing the the artwork with some animations on there, because A, I can't do that, but B, because it dims down the colors, and that too specifically gives you a way of kind of it takes away from whatever you want to get across in the artwork. What I'm saying by that is this: I'm not a fan of canvases because it changes kind of what the emphasis is on. Nice artwork here, nice canvas here. But I'm such a big believer in kind of the colors of your artwork that this is one of those things I want to call attention to. Which one is what's the intention here, right? Why is there's two different colors? So I've never been a big fan of canvases, especially when they change the emphasis on what should be a very intentionally picked art cover art. Although I understand it's not always going to be that way, and I'm willing to bet Spotify prioritizes tracks with canvases on there. Like most platforms, they always want to push users who use new features. So I'm sure it's more of a strategic thing. That's not the point. That was one of the things. Let's go to the other thing, which is I don't know what else do I need to talk about. Sure, let's talk about the sound, which is one of the first things I kind of noticed was other than the folktronic sound that I think NURKO maybe has been gravitating towards too recently. I don't know, but that was definitely the case in the tracks that you saw on my playlist. The last two tracks, Eternity and another track that I do like Eternity, but I really like the second track. Why am I forgetting what it is? Too long. It's slightly more folktronic, those two, and maybe he's been gravitating towards that sound. This is slightly more folktronic, but the biggest thing I want to call attention to is the drop, which feels like it has a little bit more pluck and more movement in the leads versus, in my eyes, at least of the NURKO I listen to, has more of those super hardcore, hard-hitting, sustained super saws that I also really like. That's the other thing I want to call attention to. But I guess we can actually talk about the track now, because I hope I'm not forgetting anything, and I hope that as I talk about the track, I all remember everything I wanted to go over. Because you're looking at The Longest Night, a 4 minute and 25-second track that has good progression. The attention is on the vocals. That's the other thing I was going to draw attention to. If you saw my episode, probably either 5 or 6, I want to say it was number 5, which was Last Hero's Deepest Veils. I mentioned how a lot of times future bass or melodic bass, future bass, melodic dubstep vocals can sound empty and can sound like they have kind of empty emotion to them, or unintentional emotion to them, or anything of that sort. I mentioned how it didn't matter in Deepest Veils, even if the lyrics did, because some tracks that track didn't really emphasize the lyrics. This track does. I mentioned how there are tracks that will strip things so that the lyrics are emphasized and that you're listening to the lyrics. And when those lyrics are empty, it kind of hurts the track. This is definitely one of those tracks that strips and emphasizes specifically the lyrics, the vocals rather, but the lyrics as well, which are always kind of a big selling point in things like melodic dubstep. So this track is definitely one of those. Are the lyrics empty? Do they feel empty? I don't know. They're vague enough that they might not. They're not. I'm not too. That's not the point. Actually, that was the other thing I was gonna mention. I'm not gonna talk about the lyrics of this track. I will leave you guys to decide if you like or dislike the lyrics, if you feel like they add emotion or if you feel like they add empty emotion. That's not what I want to emphasize. What I want to emphasize is the vocals, because props to NURKO. He does a really good job of, and I'm noticing this in the other tracks I listen of his, he does a really good job of, including progression, and B, at least in this track specifically, but I'm sure he does a good job in just in general composition of his other tracks, which means that he has the skills to emphasize how parts work together, which I'm emphasizing in this track, how the vocals work together with the instruments. The reason I don't really care too much about the lyrics is because although the intention is on the lyrics, there's a lot of movement in the vocals that pair really well with the introduction and inclusion of instruments in the track, that even if the lyrics did have empty emotion, the vocals themselves already do a really good job on the track, right? When the vocals don't do a good job, and the emphasis is on the vocals, then you have to look at the lyrics and be like, okay, maybe the lyrics are contributing something. But here, if the lyrics contribute something or if they don't, it doesn't matter, because the vocals already work really well with the track. They already kind of serve their purpose. They have their intention in the track. They sit really nicely. And NURKO does a really good job of having the melody and the rhythm of the lyrics, and as you introduce different elements or take away different elements, there's so much kind of character in the progression and the rhythm, which I've talked about in my progression videos of how you can kind of change how you can introduce a variation in rhythm to emphasize different things. And doing that with the vocals is a really good way of kind of doing that. We even talked about this a little bit in the Lights Go Out video, but here there's something so indescribable about how NURKO plays with the melody and the rhythm of the lyrics and introduces different elements, and all of a sudden different rhythms and kind of melodies, but specifically rhythms, are introduced and emphasized if you have one set of lyrics following one melody when you have just the kick playing, and then you have the same set of lyrics, or maybe the lyrics and the melody kind of switch just a little bit, and then you have the kick and the snare and you get slightly different rhythms. Then maybe you have the hook again or something different, and then the kick and the snare and the hi-hat are in there. It's all those things where the vocals do one thing, or they could be doing different things, but you introduce different backing elements, different instruments, different percussion, different drums to kind of bring out different aspects of the rhythm that this track does really, really, really well. And it's one of the reasons that I praise this track. It's a nice track. All right, thing number two I definitely want to call attention to is just kind of my impressions of this track and kind of what I hear when I hear this track. Because, you know, I hear the track, obviously I hear the vocals, I hear what you build up to, you hear those plucks, and you hear the drop, which immediately just, you think about it and I think, hey, you know what, this reminds me a lot like The World We Left Behind by Kashmir. Actually, the drop sounds very, very similar to that, and I just think it's an interesting thing that I noticed. Right, you listen to it and I'm like, oh, this reminds me of that drop. The other thing that ends up happening is in the second verse, the progression of the second verse, for some reason, reminds me a lot of From Now On by Disney, out of the Greatest Showman movie. And again, those are just, I just wanted to mention that those are just things I see, and those are some characters I get out of this track, which, to go off of what I talked about last video, I don't think this is one of those areas where you can compare the two. I'm not saying that because they remind me of those characters now, all of a sudden they exist in the same realm, because they absolutely do not, and they absolutely provide very different experiences. That's just something I wanted to share because, you know, it's an area for us to share our thoughts about tracks and be like, hey, that drop sounds like that, or this progression and storytelling reminds me of that progression and storytelling. That's all I'm saying here. So yes, the drop is very, 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 it's not very, 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 but the drop is pretty similar to Kashmir's The World We Left Behind drop. You know, you get those plucks, you get pretty similar lead style sounds, and especially when you start with just the kick and throw in that really nice reverb snare, something that's very characteristic of not only Kashmir's sound, at least at that time, but if I remember correctly, of that album, what was it, Harmonica Andromeda or something like that. But yeah, very characteristic of that album, and you get a very similar kind of style with this track and the drop, where you get the leads, you get the kick, and then you introduce that reverb snare. Same thing with the storytelling and the progression of the second verse, where, you know, you have the kick, the claps or the snare in this case come in, the hi-hat comes in, you have that kind of guitar banjo playing in the background with some really nice vocals layering over it, bringing out all sorts of nuances and variations in the rhythm of the vocals, the instruments, and how they work together specifically. Something that is also done really, really well in the second verse of From Now On by, not the second verse, it's near the end, by Disney, specifically, including Hugh Jackman, which I have thought in my head, and I'll probably go on the record and say Disney production is just fantastic, right? Sidetrack off of that, I'll go off the record and say that Disney has very good engineers. I know their Imagineers get a lot of really good praise, or at least I think. But I think they have really talented engineers, and they also and they have very talented producers, which makes me just think that Disney just has a really talented team overall. But yes, if they have very talented engineers, it's not impossible to think that their production team is very, very good, and they always have had very good production teams, musical production teams here. So I don't know why I'm mentioning this, but I just want to go on the record and say Disney has very, very, very good production. So, you know, that's always a kind of a really good place if you want kind of some inspiration as a producer for yourself, is see how they handle their production, storytelling, narratives, all that stuff. But yes, the second verse of this track does remind me of kind of the ending near there, From Now On, by Disney, out of The Greatest Showman. Anyways, those are just thoughts of things that this track reminded me of. I feel like this is getting to be a very long track review. I've been recording for 26 minutes. So why don't we get to what's the other thing I wanted to mention? Again, the biggest emphasis there was just how, and I'm glad I mentioned the whole Disney thing, because you can especially see in the second verse, the biggest emphasis of this track, again, is how the vocals and the melody of the vocals work together with instruments, and in this case, the progression of the instruments, to just bring out so much character and so much life into this track, leaving you with a very nice track. Slightly symmetrical, maybe. NURKO always does a good job of including progression in his tracks. Not always, but I feel like he generally does a good job of including progression in his tracks. You can definitely see in this track where you start more stripped, second verse has those instruments and the progression to it. the build up and kind of the strip section feels symmetrical. The drop feels pretty symmetrical. Maybe there's a new VST, but I feel like there was enough progression and character introduced that you don't really dock too many points off of the symmetry, because as I said before, artists don't always need to do something drastically new every single time for the second half of the track. This is a very good example of that now that I think about it, because throwing in that progression in the verses, and not only progression in the verses, but nice progression, bringing out so much flavor and character out of the vocals with the variation in rhythm, is a good way to kind of do something, accomplish something, not just accomplish something, but accomplish something in a very good way, that the symmetry is no longer hurting it because you're already doing other things with the track in really nice ways. So the symmetry is just, it's just kind of there, you know. Other last thing I want to call attention to before I finish up is the outro. As you can see, we have a 4-minute 25-second track. Is this the longest track we've reviewed up to this point? Maybe. To the Moon actually was probably right around there. And specifically, I remember criticizing To the Moon because I felt like the ending got cut off quite a bit. And I don't know if, please correct me if I'm wrong for the one viewer watching this, I don't know if we've gotten a track yet that has an 8-bar outro. Or rather, that keeps the, there was something else I was going to mention that I just remembered, or rather keeps the pacing, whether it be a 4-bar pacing, 8-bar, or 16-bar pacing for the outro. I feel like in my tracks, I always have very, very long outros, and maybe even extend the pacing a little bit just to give it, to just kind of draw it out and give you some closure. And I feel like a lot of times now, what artists are doing is they're either ending the drop and ending the track, or maybe ending the drop and cutting the outro pacing in half. So if you're generally getting 8 bars, every time you introduce something new in the track, they'll get a 4-bar outro just to get to the point sooner, because, you know, people are listening to shorter tracks and tracks are getting shorter and things I don't like. So I do really like that you actually get an outro out of your tracks. I love tracks with outros. Most of my tracks include pretty drawn out outros, or at least at the very least, usually they match the pacing of the track. And I don't, and this might be the first track we've gone that I feel like has a normal, regular outro. And I like that. Again, it's just normal and regular, so that doesn't all of a sudden bump it up a level. But again, I just don't want to ignore this, because so many tracks are cutting their outro short. It's so refreshing to have a track that doesn't. Again, which leads you to a 4-minute 25-second track. I like it. I like that it does that. And there you go. The other thing I was going to call attention to again is, as I mentioned in the Lights Go Out video, and as we listen to the second drop, is the pacing of the second drop, which, even though you have that symmetry, when you extend that second drop an extra phrase, you know, you just let it play out a little bit longer, especially kind of when you have the kick in the first phrase, or maybe it might be, the pacing might be cut in half there. I can't remember. Again, another thing that was pretty characteristic out of Kashmir, which is why I might be confusing the two. But in the second drop, where you have the pacing, you have the kick, you have the snare, and you introduce the elements slowly, and then once all the elements are there, you stretch it out so you can enjoy it a little bit longer, instead of introducing all the elements, the kick, the snare, and the hi-hat finally all in full force, and then all of a sudden the drop's over. No, you extend it, you let it play out, you let people appreciate and get what kind of the track deserves, the full force of the track, into the outro. So again, another really good thing, which I think that brings us to everything I wanted to go over, which leaves us with one more thing that goes hand in hand with my final rating. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the last thing here, and we can give it my final rating. All right, finally, we're going to talk about the experience of the track, because one of the things I always emphasize is track experiences. What do they deliver? Why do they deliver it? How do they deliver it? What are you trying to accomplish when you make a track, and what type of experience are you trying to get your listener to kind of experience and to listen to, rather, or to listen to at the end of the day, I should say, which is where this track, and it hurts me so much to say this, because A, I think it's slightly unfair, and B, I don't really have a very good framework and kind of a stance on this yet, so I haven't quite figured out how these things fit together. But there are, in my eyes, there are sometimes tracks that exist that fit in such weird middle grounds of, you know, let's take energy levels, for instance, where you can have a track that's high energy and you can have a track that's low energy. And sometimes having a track that's right in the middle, this is just one example, kind of hurts it, because, you know, sometimes you're in the mood for the high energy track and you don't want that middle energy track. And when you're in the mood for a low energy track, you don't want that middle energy track. But when you take a track that kind of has elements, not necessarily, when you have a track that has elements of both, and not only does it have elements of both, but it exists in a world, and in this case maybe even a genre, that usually gravitates towards one or the other, and you put it in the middle, giving you an experience of that genre that doesn't kind of fit anywhere, what I'm getting at is this track is what I'm getting at is, what was I getting at? Sometimes even when you want kind of an experience that's middle energy, you don't really gravitate for the genre that usually delivers high or low. You kind of go for something else. What I'm getting at is this. This track is kind of in that weird middle ground where it's acoustic, it's stripped, it has a drop that's not too high energy, but it exists in that future-based realm of having high energy drops where the experience is kind of torn. You know, it's one of those things where when do you go to listen for this track? And it's I think it's a very unfair thing, and it's something I definitely want to make up my mind on more, because when you want a middle energy track, I don't know if this is the one you gravitate towards. And this is something I've done before, by the way, right? It's one of the reasons I critiqued in my discography tier list, One Way or Another. The experience is my One Way or Another remix. The experience is very, very, very inconsistent, right? It's like a little bit more like the original, but it's EDM-y enough. It's like gravitating towards dance floor, but it's not dance floor. It's an extended mix, but it's also a little bit more meant to be taken casually that you can't play at sets. That's a good example of something that where the experience is just so torn, it's just hard to gravitate towards it. Even to some extent, Low, my first ever track I released on my discography, kind of fits in the same realm because it's like a stripped bass minimalistic house track that, you know, when do you go for it, right? It's hard. You need to kind of be in a very, very specific scenario where you would listen to Low, especially because it's inactive, especially because it's minimalistic. You know, it's really, really tough. So again, tough position to be in, but that is something I want to mention where the experience is kind of in a weird kind of limbo there. So with that being said, where does that leave my rating for this track? And there's one more thing that goes with my rating that I think I covered everything. So as long as I mention this last thing, we'll be good. What is my final rating for this track? You know, it's done so well. It does things better than other tracks do them. This is definitely an above average track, and that's pretty much all I need to say. Nice solid 6 out of 10 for this track. The fact that the experience is so in such a limbo, I don't think it quite reaches that 7, unfortunately. So it does many things so well. I don't think it's artistic enough to reach that 7 either. Where I always like to kind of emphasize that component, right? It either needs to be done really, really well and hit that 7, or be done pretty well and be rather artistic to hit that 7. At least in my general thought, right? Not a strict rule, just a general thought in my head. So which is why I'm going to leave this at a tough 6, a nice solid 6 out of 10. But do I add it to my playlist? I don't know. I actually listened to it the second time and I liked it a little bit more. So that's one of those things where you have a 6 out of 10, and I've said before that that's right around the area where I would add a track to my playlist or not. But because the experience is on such a weird ground, I do remember what I said. I said I would add this to my playlist, but it's tough to see how often I skip it, right? When tracks are newer, I tend to skip them less because, you know, it's new stimulus. I'll use that word. But it's very possible that, you know, the more I listen to this track, the more I'll skip it, depending on what mood I'm for, depending on how I kind of grow towards the experience of the track. As it's in there, am I going to skip it? Am I not going to skip it? I don't know. I don't think the rating changes if I do. I don't think the rating changes if I don't end up skipping it, but it's going to go in there. We'll put it in there right now. And there you go, in my playlist. It could end up being very well end up being one of those things where you just have to be in a specific mood to go for it. Just like even now, if I'm being honest, every once or twice a year, I'll be like, hey, you know what I need to listen to from now on by Disney, out of The Greatest Showman. It might be one of those things. Again, it's a really, really good track from now on, but it's not any of my playlists. It's not something that I kind of want to come up on shuffle. It needs to be in a very specific in the mood for a very specific experience to listen to it. We'll see how this track fares. It's going to go on my playlist. I like it. Nice 6 out of 10, but it's possible the fact that it does, in my opinion, at least right now, it doesn't fit into a very specific experience, that might hurt it in the long run. But other than that, that would not change my rating because it's still done very well. I'll leave you guys to decide if the lyrics are empty or not empty, but beside that, the vocals themselves still do a very good job of playing with the instruments and adding very good progressions to the track, good storytelling, bringing out all sorts of characters of the rhythm of the vocals and the instruments and how they work together. Something I always love to emphasize. Well done, NURKO. Great track. Why don't we open up the credits? I can't see why we wouldn't. There you go. Again, you start to look at, how much NURKO did, how much other artists did. I do think if I did it with John Summit, I should do it with other artists, especially bigger artists. because it's only fair. So there you go. There are your credits right there. But again, well done, NURKO. Great track. Nice, solid 6 out of 10. All right, apparently I've been recording for 38 minutes, which is impressive because I think this might be the longest track review I've done. There you go. There were a lot of things to say there, a lot of small things to say, the biggest of which just being how the vocals and the instruments work together. But, you know, talking about my experience and my past with NURKO, how familiar I am with the sound, what this track reminds me of, and all sorts of other things, you know, are things that go on in my head. They're all things that go on in my head anytime I listen to a track. They're all things that affect my rating. So they're all things, well, not all of them, right? But most of them are all things that would affect my rating. So they're all things I wanted to mention in this track review before I give it my final rating because it's only fair. So there you go. The Longest Night, NURKO, 6 out of 10. Let me know if you guys agree or disagree. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to leave it. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Let me know if you agree or disagree. Let me know if you've listened to any of NURKO's more recent stuff. If you're a big fan of his and you're definitely more familiar with his literally everything after 2023, because I haven't listened to him apparently in that long. 2023, 2024, and 2025 NURKO. There you go, because now we're on 2026, and there's some gaps that I need to fill in there. Let me know if you listen to him. Let me know if you like this track, if you dislike this track. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know if this track also reminds you of the things that I mentioned. And if you're not familiar with those things, especially the Kashmir track, go ahead and check it out because the drops are very similar. Let me know if what I said about experiences makes sense, because in my eyes it does. I'm sure it's very hard to explain, and maybe in most people's eyes it doesn't. But for the most part, that is it. Again, you guys can let me know any other tracks any other thoughts you guys may have about this track, because as a reminder, I want this channel to be a place of discussion, so you can make sure to leave your thoughts down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. But other than that, that is all I have for you. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.